From full representation to limited engagement. In the previous section, we broke down the buyer-broker exclusive employment agreement, which creates a full and exclusive relationship between the agent and the buyer. Now we move into a more limited version of that relationship. The buyer-broker agreement to show property is designed for flexibility, but it still carries legal weight. This form is often used when the relationship is just beginning, or when the buyer is not yet ready to commit to a full exclusive agreement. However, one of the biggest mistakes agents make is assuming that this form is less important. It is still an enforceable agreement, and it still controls your right to compensation. The big picture, what this agreement actually does. This agreement allows the agent to show property, begin working with the buyer, and potentially represent the buyer in a transaction. But unlike the exclusive agreement, it does not lock the buyer into a long-term exclusive relationship. This creates opportunity, but also risk. Notice to buyer, the same rule still applies. Just like the exclusive agreement, this form begins with a clear requirement. A signed written agreement must be in place before showing property. This reinforces the modern industry standard. There are no exceptions, no agreement, or no showing. Parties to the agreement, consistency matters. The agreement identifies the buyer, the brokerage, and the agent. Just like the previous form, this confirms that the brokerage is the actual party to the agreement, not the individual agent. This consistency across forms is critical for compliance and clarity. Purpose of the agreement, more than just showing homes. While the title suggests this is just for showing property, the agreement actually allows for more. It states that the broker may also provide negotiation services and advocacy throughout a transaction. This is important because the moment you begin advising or negotiating, you are stepping into full representation responsibilities. The term, short, defined, and important. This agreement includes a start date and an expiration date. Because this form is often used in early-stage relationships, the term is typically shorter. However, the same rule applies. If there is no defined term, enforceability becomes an issue. It also answers a key question. During what time period are you entitled to compensation? Property section, defining the scope of the search. This section outlines the type of property the buyer is interested in, such as residential, land, or commercial. While this may seem simple, it helps establish the scope of your services and ensures both parties are aligned on expectations. Agency, connecting back to the bigger picture. This section ties directly back to the agency disclosure form. It reminds us that this agreement does not replace agency disclosure, it works alongside it. This is another example of how all documents in a transaction must align and support each other. Broker compensation, still fully negotiable. Just like the exclusive agreement, this form clearly states, compensation is fully negotiable and not set by law or any organization. Even though this is a limited agreement, your compensation must still be clearly defined. The agreement allows for a percentage, a flat fee, or another agreed structure. When compensation is earned, this section is critical. If the broker represents the buyer in a transaction during the term of the agreement, the buyer agrees to compensate the broker at closing. This ties directly back to what we discussed in the previous section. Your compensation must be clearly defined, properly executed, and aligned with the transaction. Compensation and the seller, staying consistent. The agreement allows the broker to accept compensation from the seller or listing broker, which is credited toward the agreed compensation. But here is where agents must stay sharp. This amount must align with your buyer-broker agreement and the seller compensation addendum if a transaction occurs. Even in a limited agreement, consistency is key. Showing instructions, a major 2026 practice standard. This section reflects one of the most important updates in today's market. The broker agrees to show properties that meet the buyer's criteria, regardless of the compensation offered. This reinforces a major shift in professional expectations. You serve the client's interests first, not your compensation. If compensation needs to be adjusted, it must be discussed, negotiated, and documented separately. Equal housing, always in effect. This section reinforces compliance with fair housing laws and ensures that all buyers are treated equally. This is not optional. It is a fundamental requirement of every transaction. Execution, still the most critical step. Just like the exclusive agreement, this form must be signed by the buyer, signed by the agent, delivered as a fully executed agreement. This ties directly back to the previous section and the case discussion. If it is not fully executed, it may not be enforceable. Even though this is a showing agreement, you are still protecting your right to compensation. The real-world risk, where agents get it wrong. An agent uses this form casually, thinking it is just for showings. They forget to clearly define compensation or fail to fully execute the agreement. Later, the buyer moves forward with a transaction. The agent expects to be paid, but the agreement is unclear or incomplete. Now there is a dispute. The issue is not the work performed, it is the documentation. Bringing it all together. This agreement is a stepping stone. It often leads into a full buyer-broker agreement, but it still carries legal and financial consequences on its own. This section ties directly to everything we have covered. Agency must be clear, compensation must be defined, agreements must be executed properly, all documents must align before closing. Whether you are using a full exclusive agreement or a showing agreement, the standard is the same: clarity, consistency, and compliance. Online discussion. Question: why is the buyer-broker agreement to show property still important even though it is limited? Answer: because it is still a binding agreement that defines representation and compensation. Question: what is the biggest risk when using this form casually? Answer: failing to properly define or execute compensation terms, which can lead to disputes or lost commission. Question: how does this agreement connect to the previous section? Answer: it reinforces the same principles of execution, compensation clarity, and alignment across all transaction documents.